I stood still in my small apartment, my hand gripping my phone tightly, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. You didn't need that money. My father's voice came through the speaker, casual as if he were discussing something trivial. Anyway, you're smart. I'm sure you'll figure something out. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. How much is left? A brief silence, then the answer that made my blood run cold. None, Amy. He sighed, his tone making it seem like I was the one causing problems. I had some debts to take care of. But don't worry. You'll manage. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. My college fund, the money I had painstakingly saved from scholarships, shifts at a local cafe, and the meager earnings from tutoring, was gone. How long ago did you take it all? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, it's been a while, he said dismissively, as if it were no big deal. You're at the best age of your life. You should be enjoying it instead of burying yourself in books. Maybe this is a sign for you to explore a new path. A new path? Did he really think I could just walk away from everything so easily? I took a deep breath, pushing down the anger rising inside me. I see. My father chuckled as if mistaking my acceptance for compliance. That's my girl, always practical, just like your old man. Listen, I have to run, meeting some friends. We'll talk later, okay? The screen went dark as he hung up. I remained frozen in place, his words echoing in my mind. What angered me the most wasn't just that he had taken my savings. It was how effortlessly he did it. So casually, without a hint of guilt, as if it were a minor decision that shouldn't bother me at all. My phone buzzed, a text from him. Don't tell your mom or grandma about this. No need to worry them. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he didn't want them to know, just like he hadn't wanted them to know about his gambling debts, his failed business ventures, or his constant borrowing with no intention of paying back. I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. I needed to know exactly what he had done. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The moment I saw the transaction history, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Over $38,000. Everything I had worked tirelessly to save had been drained in the past 3 months. Not in one go, but through a series of small withdrawals, each just low enough to avoid triggering immediate red flags. I stared at the screen, a sharp pain in my chest. He hadn't just taken my money. He had planned this. He knew exactly what he was doing. The door to my room creaked open. Emma, my roommate, stepped in. She stopped short when she saw me sitting among scattered papers, my face pale. Her brow furrowed. Amy, are you okay? I let out a dry laugh, one laced with bitterness. My dad took all of my college money. Emma's eyes widened. What? She snatched my laptop, scanning the transactions. This is theft. You have to report him. I shook my head. I can't. He's a co-owner of the account. Legally, he had the right to access it. Emma muttered a curse under her breath. But you earned that money. You worked so hard for it. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I should have seen this coming. This isn't the first time. Emma looked at me, confused. I took a deep breath. He used to borrow my birthday money when I was a kid. Always promised to pay it back, but never did. He even tried to convince me to take out student loans in my name to help him with his debts. I don't know why I thought this time would be any different. My phone buzzed again. Don't stress over the money. Maybe this is a sign you should take a break from school. I know some people who can get you a job. You're pretty. You could model instead of wasting time on classes. A surge of fury coursed through me. I was not a tool. I was not a resource for him to exploit. I opened my laptop, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as my mind cleared. I needed a plan. First, I had to gather evidence. I downloaded my bank statements, highlighting every suspicious withdrawal. I pulled up emails confirming my scholarships, every deposit I had made, anything that proved that money belonged to me. Next, I had to research the legal aspects. My father might have been a co-owner of the account, but was there any way to hold him accountable? I needed to understand my rights and find a way forward. I couldn't let things end like this. Then came the financial side. I couldn't let him ruin my future. I would reach out to the student support office, explore loan options, emergency aid, anything that could help me complete my final year without interruption. Finally, I had to protect what was left. I would close the old account, transfer all remaining funds to a new bank where my father had no access. If he had done this once, who was to say he wouldn't try again? Step by step, I would take back control of my life. I looked up at Emma. "I'm not letting this go easily." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with support. "I'm with you. You deserve better." I glanced out the window. London still shimmered under the streetlights. I had fallen in love with this city, dreamed of a bright future here, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, take that away from me. I never thought I would be the one to expose such a painful truth about my family, but if I wanted to protect my future, I had no other choice. The next morning, I went to my university's financial aid office. The advisor looked at me with sympathy as I explained what had happened. "We'll review your case, Amy. There are emergency aid programs available for students in financial distress, but you should also consider legal options." She suggested I reach out to the Student Legal Services office to see if there was any way to hold my father accountable. I left the meeting with a list of steps to take, but most importantly, I no longer felt alone in this. Then I called my grandmother. I knew she was the one person my father couldn't manipulate. When I told her everything, she was silent for a few seconds. Then her voice dropped, filled with anger. "You did the right thing telling me. We won't let this go." 3 days later, she organized a family meeting, without my father. In her living room, my mother sat quietly on the couch, her face pale as she read the messages my father had sent me. My Aunt Lauren, my mother's sister and a lawyer, studied the printed bank statements with a serious expression. My mother looked up, her eyes filled with disbelief. "He lied to me?" Her voice trembled. "He told me you chose to drop out, that you were feeling lost and wanted to come home to figure things out." She shook her head, clenching her hands as if trying to steady herself. "I can't believe this." I let out a bitter laugh. "You always believed him, didn't you, no matter how many times he betrayed you?" My grandmother exhaled sharply, her gaze sharper than ever. "No one in this family will ever believe him again." She turned to Aunt Lauren. "What can we do?" Aunt Lauren clasped her hands together, deep in thought. "Since Amy's father was a co-owner of the account, legally he had the right to withdraw the money, but..." She tapped the papers lightly. "We can pressure him in other ways." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Lauren gave a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "He admitted in his messages that the money was for your education. We can send a formal letter demanding repayment. If he ignores it, we can pursue civil action, or, at the very least, make his life very difficult." I nodded. "I want to do that." My grandmother looked at me, pride shining in her eyes. "You remind me of myself when I was younger." That evening, Aunt Lauren drafted a formal letter demanding my father repay the full amount he had taken, or face legal consequences. My mother remained silent throughout the evening. But then, she looked up, her expression more determined than I had ever seen. "Lauren, can you help me with something else?" My aunt raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" My mother tightened her hands together. "I want a divorce." A heavy silence filled the room. I turned to my grandmother and saw her nod slightly. "You finally see him for who he really is." 2 days later, the letter from the lawyer reached my father. I knew this because less than an hour after he received it, I got a flood of frantic messages. "What are you doing? Family doesn't sue each other. You're ruining my reputation." I had a reply. An hour later, he called. I stared at the flashing screen, then silenced it, letting it go to voicemail. Less than a minute later, he called again. Finally, I picked up. "Hello, Dad? What are you thinking, Amy?" His voice was filled with anger. "You're turning your back on your own family over a few $1,000s?" I let out a small laugh. "A few $1,000s? That was my future. I'll pay it back when I can," he said quickly. I frowned. "When?" He hesitated. "I can't promise an exact date, but..." "Then that's not good enough," I cut in. "I need a clear answer, or we'll let the courts decide." He sighed, his tone shifting to something softer. "You know I was only trying to do what's best for the family, right? You wouldn't actually sue your own father, would you?" I took a deep breath, then smiled coldly. "You're right. I won't sue you." I paused. "Aunt Lauren will do it for me." A long silence stretched between us. I could imagine his face at that moment, confused, angry, then panicked. Finally, he muttered, "You can't do this to your father." I sighed. "You did this to yourself." Then, I hung up. 3 days later, my grandmother called me. "Your father just came by." I sat up straight. "What did he say?" She chuckled lightly, but I could hear the sharpness in her tone. "He tried to convince me to talk you out of this. Said you were tearing the family apart." I shook my head. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that you weren't the one who tore this family apart. He did that a long time ago." I leaned back into my chair, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "Thank you, Grandma." She was silent for a moment before saying, "Amy, there's something I haven't told you." I frowned. "What is it?" "Your mother went through a lot with your father. He didn't just take money from her. He controlled her in ways you can't imagine. Every time she tried to leave, he found a way to pull her back in with lies and empty promises. I warned her many times, but she still believed him." A surge of anger burned inside me. I had thought I was the only victim, but my mother had endured this for years. I believe this time, she will finally break free. And I knew that this time, I wouldn't let my father have another chance. I hadn't expected my father to change, but I also hadn't expected him to react this way. When the repayment demand letter reached him, instead of owning up to his actions or trying to make amends, my father launched his usual manipulation campaign. He called every family member, spinning an entirely different version of the story. "Ami is trying to destroy my reputation," he told Uncle James, my grandmother's brother. "She's been influenced by the wrong people. If it weren't for outsiders, she would never do this to her own family. I know Amy lost some money, but she's young. She has her whole future ahead of her. I don't," he lamented to Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. "Does she really want her own father to be left with nothing?" He even called my grandmother, attempting to appeal to her sympathy. "Mom, I know I made mistakes, but this is a family matter. It shouldn't go to court. Can't you talk to Amy and make her drop this?" But this time, no one believed him. My grandmother responded in a calm yet firm voice. "No, Gregory. You can't fool me anymore, or your wife, or your daughter. Amy is doing the right thing, and I will always stand by her." His calls became his own downfall. Instead of turning the family against me, they only reminded everyone of what he had done in the past. One by one, people started sharing the stories they had once kept silent. Uncle James recalled the money my father had borrowed for a business investment, only to disappear without a trace. Aunt Patricia mentioned the funds he had taken from her children's education savings, promising to repay within 6 months, but never doing so. Even distant relatives began piecing together the pattern. How? My father would borrow money and then dodge any conversation about repayment. What I had gone through was only a small part of a cycle that had lasted for decades. While my father continued to isolate himself, I kept moving forward. After reviewing my case, my university agreed to grant me a special financial aid package so I could complete my final year. My advisor, Miss Matthews, even helped me find additional scholarship opportunities to make up for part of the lost funds. Additionally, my grandmother helped me secure a part-time job at a local library, a job that not only provided income, but also gave me a quiet space to focus on my studies. I once thought losing that money meant my future had collapsed, but in reality, it only made me more determined than ever. I would not let my father dictate my fate. While I was rebuilding my life, my father was losing everything. During the divorce proceedings, my mother finally found the courage to reveal the truth. She provided the lawyer with evidence of how my father had controlled her finances, the debts he had hidden while borrowing money under the guise of supporting the family, and even instances where he secretly used shared assets as collateral for personal loans. When this evidence was presented in court, the carefully maintained image of a trustworthy man that my father had upheld for years completely crumbled. He was forced to give up a larger share of assets than he had anticipated, and more importantly, he was ordered to repay the money he had taken from my college fund in installments. At first, he tried to evade this responsibility. He sent me messages filled with blame. "You're destroying me. Do you even know how much I've sacrificed for you?" I didn't reply. Then he tried another approach. "Family comes first, Amy. Do you really want to see your father backed into a corner?" I still didn't respond. Finally, he resorted to pleading. "Just this once, Amy. Give me a little more time. I'll pay you back, but don't push me too hard." I simply forwarded the message to Aunt Lauren, because by then I understood the truth. My father wasn't truly remorseful. He didn't think he had done anything wrong. He only regretted that, for the first time, someone was holding him accountable. The day he was due to make his first repayment, I received another message from him. "I won't let this end like this." I didn't care. I only looked at my bank notification, the first deposit he was legally required to make. That money couldn't undo the damage he had caused, but it was proof of something far more important. For the first time in my life, my father no longer had control over me. 3 years later, I stood on the stage at my graduation ceremony, wearing my navy blue gown, looking down at the audience where my grandmother and mother sat, clapping proudly. I had made it. Despite my father draining my college fund, despite the struggles of juggling part-time jobs and financial burdens, I had graduated on time, with honors. After the ceremony, as friends and family gathered to take photos, I checked my phone. A message from an unlisted number. But I didn't need to guess who it was. "Congratulations, my girl. I always knew you would succeed. Do you have time to call your dad?" I stared at the message for a moment, then locked my screen. My father hadn't changed. I knew he wasn't congratulating me out of pride for my achievements. He was just looking for another way back into my life, to see what he could gain from me this time. I didn't reply. 2 months later, I moved to London and started my first job as a financial analyst at a prestigious consulting firm. My apartment was small but cozy, with a large window overlooking the bustling streets. I had achieved this on my own. Not thanks to my father, not because of him, and certainly with no help from him. But it seemed he still couldn't accept that. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Emma sent me a link. "Have you seen this?" I opened it. A public social media post from my father, accompanied by an old picture of the two of us when I was a child. I've always believed in my daughter. I did everything to help her succeed. A proud father. I set my phone down on the table, an uneasy feeling rising in my chest. He was trying to rewrite the story, trying to make people believe he was a devoted father, that my success was because of him. But this time, the difference was, no one believed him anymore. Underneath the post, relatives and acquaintances left skeptical comments. "So you helped her by taking her entire college fund?" Aunt Patricia wrote. "What an amazing father, who would have thought?" Another relative mocked. My father tried to control the narrative, but this time he couldn't. The final payment arrived quietly. I received a bank notification. The last installment of my father's debt had been deposited into my account. I wasn't expecting an apology, but I did receive a letter. I opened it, immediately recognizing his familiar handwriting. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but family is family. I don't want things to end this way. You've made it, you're successful. Can you forgive me? Maybe we can go back to how things were. We can start over. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. Forgiveness was not the issue. I was no longer angry. I was no longer hurt. I had everything I needed to move forward. But starting over had never been an option. I had seen him for who he truly was, and I no longer needed someone like that in my life. A few months later, my grandmother visited me in London. We sat in a small cafe near my office, sipping hot tea on a chilly afternoon. She looked at me and smiled. "You did it, Amy. You stood on your own." I smiled back, feeling lighter than ever. "I don't think he ever truly regretted anything," I said, gazing out the window. "He just regrets that he can't control me anymore." She nodded. "And that is the greatest punishment for him?" I took a sip of tea, feeling its warmth spread through me. My life was now mine alone. No more manipulation, no more exploitation. I had stepped out of my father's shadow, and I would never go back. Amy's story is not just about a father's betrayal, but about reclaiming control over her own life. Sometimes, the very people who should protect us become our biggest obstacles. But instead of breaking, Amy used that betrayal as fuel to rise above it. Her success wasn't just financial independence, it was escaping the cycle of manipulation and reclaiming her voice. In life, sometimes the best thing we can do is move forward without looking back. What do you think about Amy's story? Have you ever faced a similar situation in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life, family, and the lessons that shape us.